The heavy knock echoed through the hallway at exactly 9 o'clock at night. I pulled the front door open. A stranger shoved a thick stack of legal papers against my chest, turned on his heel, and walked away into the dark. At the end of my driveway, standing perfectly still under the amber street lamp, was my mother, Beatrice. She wore a pristine designer coat. Her eyes were dead and locked onto mine, exactly like they were 20 years ago when she threw me out into a freezing rainstorm with a newborn baby. I stared down at the top page of the document. It was a vicious court petition declaring me an unfit mother, demanding the immediate seizure of my 20-year-old son Leo's $1,500,000 trust fund. The parents who discarded my baby like garbage were back to steal his future. The audacity of the lawsuit was staggering, but the foundation for their greed had been laid 3 days earlier at my grandmother Vera's funeral. The church smelled of heavy lilies and expensive perfume. Victor and Beatrice, my estranged parents, played their parts flawlessly. They stood near the altar, dabbing completely dry eyes with embroidered handkerchiefs, accepting condolences from their wealthy country club friends. They were the picture of devastating grief. But the moment the crowd thinned, the grieving son routine vanished. Victor cornered me near the wooden pews. He adjusted his silk tie, looked down his nose at me, and demanded the keys to Vera's house. He claimed the family needed to secure its legacy immediately. I looked at his perfectly manicured hands. My mind violently flashed back 2 decades. I remembered those exact hands pointing out the front door of their mansion into the freezing rain, telling a terrified, pregnant 16-year-old girl that she was a disgusting mistake and a stain on the family name. They broke me back then. But standing in that church, looking at the man who abandoned me, my spine turned to steel. I refused to hand over the keys. I turned my back and walked away. Less than 72 hours later, their lawyers delivered the threat to my doorstep. They built their entire legal strategy on a fatal assumption. Victor and Beatrice genuinely believed I was still the helpless, uneducated teenager they threw onto the street. They assumed I had spent the last 20 years scrubbing floors or waiting tables. They had no idea that I had spent the last 15 years working quietly as a senior court reporter in the state's busiest civil litigation division. For a decade and a half, I had been the invisible woman sitting in the corner of the courtroom, typing every single word, watching exactly how arrogant, greedy men hung themselves on the public record. I knew every evidentiary standard. I knew every legal loophole. Most importantly, I knew exactly how to build a trap. I sat down at Vera's heavy oak dining table and opened my laptop. My hands did not shake. My breathing remained perfectly steady. I bypassed the expensive attorneys and filed my response directly with the court clerk, representing myself. I knew Victor would be obsessively refreshing the public court dockets, looking for any sign of weakness. I gave him exactly what he wanted. I drafted the mandatory estate inventory for Vera's assets right in the middle of the document, buried between the furniture and the bank accounts. I explicitly listed a collection of vintage, untraceable bearer bonds and heirloom gold jewelry. I stated these highly liquid assets were currently secured inside the heavy steel floor safe in Vera's den. It was an exaggerated, blinding piece of bait, perfectly tailored for a desperate man. Then I went on the offensive. I issued a rapid-fire, legally binding subpoena aimed straight at the hidden financial records of my older brother, Marcus. Marcus was the golden child. the supposed tech genius, the son they chose over me. The records returned from the banks 5 days later. One glance at the highlighted columns confirmed the magnificent truth. Marcus was not a successful entrepreneur. He was drowning in catastrophic, high-interest debt. His startup had collapsed. His luxury cars were facing repossession. And he was exactly 30 days away from declaring Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Victor and Beatrice were not suing me to protect my son or preserve a family legacy. Their perfect, wealthy facade was crumbling. They were desperately trying to steal Leo's inheritance to quietly bail out the golden child before the country club found out they were entirely broke. The morning of the hearing arrived with suffocating humidity. Before I even reached the courtroom doors, Victor's slick, high-priced lawyer intercepted me in the marble hallway. He stepped right into my personal space, blocking my path. He smiled a predatory, hollow smile. He leaned in and threatened to have me held in legal contempt for harassing Marcus with frivolous subpoenas. He told me I was out of my depth, that the judge would destroy me, and that if I walked through those double doors, I would lose every single penny. He offered me a generous settlement. If I surrendered 80% of the trust fund immediately, they would let me keep the house and drop the custody smear campaign. I stared at the knot in his expensive tie. I shifted my gaze up to his eyes. I let the heavy, suffocating silence stretch between us until his fake smile faltered. I stepped around him and pushed the heavy wooden doors open. Inside the courtroom, Victor, Beatrice, and Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table. They whispered to each other, radiating absolute toxic smugness. I sat completely alone at the defense table. The judge, a man I had worked alongside for 8 years, called the court to order. He looked down at the documents, his expression entirely neutral, and asked for my response to the severe allegations of elder abuse and maternal incompetence. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my blazer. I submitted Exhibit A. It was 20 years of continuous notarized medical evaluations proving Grandma Vera possessed a razor-sharp mental capacity until the day she died. There was no undue influence. Then I dropped the kill shot onto the polished mahogany table. Exhibit B. It was a sworn, notarized affidavit drafted by Vera the very morning after the storm 20 years ago. My grandmother was a quiet genius. She had legally documented the exact physical state I arrived in. Soaked, freezing, abandoned. She created a permanent legal barrier ensuring Victor could never, ever claim parental rights or lay a finger on the trust fund. Finally, I submitted Marcus's complete bankruptcy files. The shift in the room was violent. The color completely drained from Victor's face, leaving him looking like wet ash. Marcus dropped his pen. His chest heaved as he began hyperventilating, realizing his financial secrets were now permanent public record. Beatrice covered her mouth, her fake tears entirely replaced by raw, suffocating panic. The judge flipped through the financial ruin with deep visible disgust. He slammed his gavel down. He dismissed their lawsuit with extreme prejudice, meaning they could never bring the claim again. Furthermore, citing the malicious, fraudulent nature of the lawsuit, he ordered Victor to pay 100% of my legal fees. The implosion in the hallway was absolute poetry. The perfect family shattered into a million jagged pieces. Beatrice collapsed onto a wooden bench, sobbing hysterically into her hands. completely undone by the realization that her social standing was dead. Marcus did not even look at his parents. The golden child was frantically pacing near the elevators, his phone pressed to his ear, begging a sketchy creditor for an extension. He abandoned them the second the money dried up. Victor chased after me. His chest heaved. Sweat stained the collar of his expensive dress shirt. He grabbed the sleeve of my blazer. His voice cracked as he begged me for a family loan. He pleaded, saying they were going to lose their home, that Marcus was going to face criminal fraud charges. I looked at the trembling, broken man standing in front of me. I searched my chest for any lingering anger, any pity, any trace of the terrified girl he threw into the rain. There was absolutely nothing left. I pulled my arm away. I looked him dead in the eyes. I reminded him that 20 years ago, he pointed into the dark and told me I was dead to him. I told him that today. I finally agreed. I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright, blinding sunlight. But a narcissist backed into a corner will always make one final, fatal mistake. I knew Victor was completely bankrupt. I knew he needed untraceable flight capital to escape his creditors. That night, Leo and I did not sleep at Vera's house. I booked an Airbnb directly across the street at exactly midnight. The sharp crash of shattering glass echoed through the quiet neighborhood. Victor had broken through the back patio door. I sat in the dark by the window, watching his flashlight beam cut through the living room. He headed straight for the den. He found the heavy steel floor safe I had so carefully detailed in the public court records. He did not need a crowbar. I knew he would remember the combination. He punched in his own birthday, a narcissistic detail he remembered his mother using decades ago. The heavy door clicked open. I could practically feel his desperate anticipation from across the street. He reached inside. The safe was completely empty, except for a single piece of paper resting on the cold steel floor. The note read, "Smile for the camera." Red and blue lights violently flooded the den. I had bypassed the standard emergency dispatch and called the direct cell phone of the precinct sergeant, a man who brought me coffee every Tuesday at the courthouse. 5 heavily armed officers swarmed the house. The front door burst open. They dragged Victor out in handcuffs. I stepped out onto the porch of the Airbnb, holding a warm cup of chamomile tea. Victor twisted his head, his eyes wild and furious as they shoved him into the back of the squad car. He was officially facing charges for first-degree aggravated burglary. He had broken into a property to steal over $100,000 in alleged asset. The cycle of abuse was not just broken. It was buried under the crushing weight of the penal code. The justice system moves slowly, but it crushes everything in its path. 6 months later, the gavel fell one final time. The judge sentenced Victor to 6 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole only after 4 years. The court ordered complete financial restitution for the property damage and the legal fees. The fallout was absolute. Beatrice lost the mansion to the bank. Her country club membership was publicly revoked. She moved into a small, rundown apartment on the outskirts of the city, utterly shunned by the people she had spent her entire life trying to impress. Marcus fled the state, dodging federal fraud investigators. They lost their money, their freedom, and their precious reputation. A year after the sentencing, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. It had a state penitentiary return address. It was from Victor. I stood in my kitchen and stared at his familiar, looping handwriting. 10 years ago, a letter like that would have sent me into a spiral of anxiety. I would have agonized over his words, wondering if he finally felt remorse, wondering if he was finally ready to be a father. Now, I felt absolutely nothing. I did not open it. I did not read his desperate attempts to manipulate me from behind bars. I walked over to the garbage can and dropped the unopened envelope straight into the trash. The hollow echo of his power over me was permanently gone. I walked into the living room. Leo was sitting on the couch, laughing with 3 of his close college friends. They were eating pizza, loudly debating a movie, filling Vera's house with an incredible, vibrant warmth, looking at my son, brilliant, kind, and completely unburdened by the generational trauma that had defined my youth. I finally understood the magnitude of what we had survived. I built a fortress for him, and the walls were finally secure. If you take anything away from my story, let it be these 3 unbreakable rules. Rule number 1, blood makes you related. Loyalty makes you family. Grandma Vera did not have to open her door to a freezing teenager, but she did. True family are the people who help you lay the bricks for your fortress, not the ones who lock you out in the storm. Never let society guilt you into tolerating abuse just because you share a last name with your abuser. Rule number 2, never fight a narcissist with emotion. Fight them with documentation. Abusers feed on your tears, your anger, and your desperate pleas for understanding. It validates their power. When you strip the emotion away, when you replace your tears with cold, hard facts, subpoenas, and unshakable logic, their entire illusion of control shatters. Rule number 3, the absolute best revenge is a life beautifully lived and fiercely protected. I did not destroy my parents by stooping to their level. I destroyed them by stepping out of my victimhood and allowing their own blinding greed to spring the trap. Have you ever been told that you owe someone your peace just because they are family? Have you ever had to walk away from the people who were supposed to protect you in order to finally protect yourself? Drop a 1 in the comments if you have had to break a cycle. And share your story below. You are not alone. Hit subscribe. Protect your peace. And I will see you in the next chapter. I know exactly what you are screaming at the screen right now. You are watching this and wondering how on earth a father who threw his pregnant teenager into a freezing storm could actually believe she would just hand over $1,500,000 2 decades later. It feels completely delusional, right? But let us decode the psychology behind this. Toxic family dynamics run on something therapists call the slot machine effect, or intermittent reinforcement. Abusers drop tiny, unpredictable crumbs of hope, like playing the grieving. Respectable parents at a funeral, and they expect you to stay addicted to the machine, hoping to finally win the jackpot of their unconditional love. They assume your inner 16-year-old is still terrified and craving their approval. Maya won because she did not just walk away from the casino, she completely dismantled the machine. Now, let us get into the street smart financial analysis. Because Maya and Grandma Vera just gave us a masterclass in protecting your assets from predatory relatives. If you ever find yourself in a similar crosshair, here is your playbook. First, the audit strategy. Notice how Maya never engaged in screaming matches in the hallway. She did not waste her breath explaining how much she hurt. Instead, she filed a subpoena for her brother's bank record. Financial abusers operate in the shadows of guilt and obligation. The second you force their actions into the harsh, undeniable light of bank statements, credit defaults, and bankruptcy filings, their power completely evaporates. Scammers hate a paper trail. Second, the ironclad wall. Let us talk about Grandma Vera. She did not just hand Maya a pile of cash, which could easily be contested or stolen. She invested in their future by setting up a highly secure trust fund, and then she aggressively protected it, gathering 20 years of notarized medical evaluations and filing a sworn affidavit of abandonment the very morning after the storm was brilliant. She built a legal fortress. If you are leaving money to someone vulnerable, do not just leave a will, leave undeniable. Notarize proof of your intentions. Third, building the case. Maya used the legal system to set a trap by explicitly listing untraceable assets in the public estate inventory. She weaponized her father's own desperation against him. She did not need to confront him in the dark. She just set the bait, stepped back, and let his greed upgrade a civil family dispute into a felony burglary charge. Here is the final verdict. Financial independence paired with airtight documentation is the ultimate boundary. Toxic people will always try to use the word family as a master key to unlock your bank account and your peace of mind. Your job is to change the lock. What is the smartest boundary you have ever set to protect yourself from a toxic person? Drop your street smart survival tips in the comments below, because your advice might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Stay sharp. Protect your peace, and hit that subscribe button. I will see you in the next video.